Last video, I spent 12 hours watching the Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave trailer and talked about everything I could find. Well, it turns out I missed a couple of very interesting details. Twitter and Reddit sleuths have discovered even more Easter eggs, which spiraled me into what I thought would be a new video theorizing if this game isn't an alternate universe or sequel, but possibly a prequel or midquel. And things are now crazy, as the script has now reached like 5,500 words. The focus of this video is exclusively to talk about my personal theory that the setting of this game is one of those two. We're going deep into Three Houses and Three Hopes lore to set up actual arguments for either setting. We're starting from Sothis' origins up until Nemesis is defeated, cataloging every important historical moment. Also, this video is kind of time sensitive because I don't know when new information is coming out, so the editing on this video isn't going to be that impressive. It's mostly going to be B-roll, the same trailer over and over again, so there's your warning, because this is going to be a long video as I'm recording this. In order to catch everyone up with Three Houses' timeline around the beginning of Sothis' rule, we need to refer to in-game dialogue and library entries. Most obviously, society existed before Sothis appeared, and things started off not terrible between her and humanity. According to Rhea in Verdant Wind, Sothis helps humanity.
The progenitor god came from somewhere far away and descended upon this continent. She changed her form to resemble that of a human and gave her own blood to birth her children. The progenitor god and her children shared knowledge and skills with the people of the land. Together, they built a prosperous civilization. But the humans turned their backs on the teachings of the progenitor god and engaged in senseless wars.
Bear in mind that Three Houses is deliberate in its biased storytelling. The above was Rhea's understanding of the events between Sothis and humanity, so her understanding is that humanity grew overconfident, ended up starting wars against each other, and eventually challenged Sothis. But here's the opposite perspective. It was the ancient Agarthans, those of Agartha living on the surface and were wary of Sothis' presence, believing that Sothis was trying to take control of them. This would eventually lead to the technologically advanced society to launch pillars of light into cities where Sothis was living at the time, as written in a Shadow Library entry titled Romance of the World's Perdition. In the land of Thinis, where the old gods are said to live, the false god has awakened. Its looming heteromorphic vessel was resurrected to sink the world to the depths of the ocean. It will bring extinction to all children of men and salvation to all beasts of the land, sky, and sea. For the children of men who spilled too much of the blood of life, it promises only cruel retribution. The false god must be defeated before the world sinks into a watery grave. To this end, the children of men have erected pillars of light upon the land. Thinis, Malum, Septem, and Liam were utterly destroyed. Those lands have vanished from this world, yet even still the false god stands, and soon a flood aptly named Despair will drown this world. The author refers to Sothis as a false god who has awakened. Thinis is a city where the old gods live, and whether those are the old gods that Agarthans worshipped, or other Nabateans, with other three cities, Malum, Septem, and Liam, being destroyed by their attack. He refers to Sothis as a heteromorphic vessel, and that she can transform into a dragon who was resurrected to end the world via a flood called Despair. The author writes this in a prophetic way, as if this has happened before, as if a cycle is repeating. And as the Book of Saros writes, the creation in the beginning amid the great cloudless ocean, Fodlan came to be. In other words, a flood. Sothis eradicating the Agarthans and recreating humanity in her image. The author values humanity and resents that Sothis will bring salvation to all beasts of the land, sky, and sea. Given the timeline suggesting that Sothis' presence is at large, these beasts are likely her children, i.e. other Nabateans. Midquel was a beast of the sky, Indek was a massive turtle in the water, and Keyhole's form is unknown, but he was an earth dragon. Midquel being referred to as the wind dragon, and Indek being referred to as the water dragon in the actual game. Evidently, Sethlian makes up the last of this quartet, being a light dragon. These four make up the four saints, by the way. In the writer's perspective, Sothis and her Nabateans are basically alien invaders who need to be eradicated, which is literally true. Sothis came from the fell star Sirius, from outer space. Other characters that call the dragons beasts are Agarthans, including Talus, Solon, and Epimenides. I should also remind you guys here that the Agarthans have their own magic, dark magic, completely separate from the Nabateans, which is white and black magic. Whether or not Sothis helped them develop that magic further on is anyone's guess. After the destruction of the world, Sothis used up all of her power to rebuild and restore the drowned world.
It took the progenitor god an astonishing amount of time to revive the ravaged world. But eventually, the continent found peace again, and the progenitor god, having fulfilled her duty, fell into a long slumber in the holy tomb. The children who stayed behind built a settlement in Zanado to protect the Holy Tomb as they quietly lived out their lives.
And so Zanado is established in the Red Canyon. The children who stayed behind are Nabateans who left to protect her as she rested, but the wording suggests that there are children who chose not to stay behind. Now that we've established a timeline leading up to Sothis' rest, the next major event in Fodlan's history was Nemesis plundering the tomb where he kidnapped Sothis. Nemesis' history in Fodlan isn't exactly complicated, but his legacy and notoriety depend on who you ask, so let's go over the facts. Seiros and the other Nabateans, official history aside, will tell you that he was a thief, kidnapped and murdered Sothis in her sleep. He/the Agarthans forged the Sword of the Creator out of her remains. Nemesis drank her blood to acquire the Crest of Flames and consequently gained incredible power and greatly extended his lifespan.
Nemesis was originally the leader of a group of bandits. He plundered the Holy Tomb and stole the remains of the progenitor god. When Nemesis appeared in Zanado some time later, he already wielded the Sword of the Creator. I do not know how Nemesis obtained the sword, or why he appeared in Zanado. From their corpses he gained even more power and brought war to Fodlan. A mere bandit like Nemesis would not have been capable of anything so monstrous on his own.
The Agarthans will also tell you he was just a thief. Talus calls him as much, and the Agarthans have always treated him with contempt. He was just a tool for them to acquire the power they needed to eradicate the Nabateans. They didn't care for the glory, they wanted revenge.
However, something else was. The Sword of the Creator.
Ah, the weapon wielded by that thief, the King of Liberation.
Thief. Huh.
Nemesis returned to Zanado and led the charge against the Nabateans living there. Seiros, being the sole survivor, gives us an idea of how many kinds of dragons were with her during the attack. For those who don't know, there are 22 types of dragons that exist, all meant to align with the Terrath. Of the 21 other dragon types that exist, 11 types of Nabateans were slaughtered and shared the same cruel fate as Sothis. This event led to the formation of the 10 elites and more heroes' relics. The 10 and the 11th dragon killed were the following: a Crusher dragon, whose remains were used to create Crusher and whose blood was consumed by Dominic; a Shield dragon, known as the Steadfast, whose remains were used to create the Aegis Shield and whose blood was consumed by Fraldarius. Now I'm going to shorten these because you get the pattern. A Flame dragon associated with Lewin and Daphno, a Grim dragon, Eredbar, Blathid, a Craft dragon, Thyrsis, Gloucester, a Kalpa dragon, Freykugel, Goneril, a Fisher dragon, Lance of Ruin, Gautier, a Lightning dragon, Thunderbrand and Suddenger's Mystery, Sharon, a Star Dragon, Fail Not, Regan, an Aegis Dragon, Raphael Gem, the Ichor Scroll, and the Answerer, Lamine. And the 11th, a Storm Dragon used to create the Blood Gang, whose blood was consumed by Morris. But due to his mental decline, disappearance, and eventual transformation into a demonic beast, his part in history was mostly scrubbed. He lost his status as an elite, and his clan's name became infamous for perpetual misfortune. After kidnapping Sothis and becoming her crest bearer, Nemesis would return and slaughter the rest of the dragons there with the newly forged Sword of the Creator. Whether he soloed them or had an army is unclear, but it is worth noting that one of the elites in the Shadow Library entry doesn't understand why Seiros hates them, and Maurice was recruited by Nemesis as an elite later on, and this is probably the case for most of them. He liberated humanity from Nabatean rule and enabled the 11 elites to establish a new era of humanity. This era lasted for a few centuries up until the Church of Seiros, led by Seiros herself, the 4 saints and their most devout followers who were allowed to consume their blood to acquire similar power and wield the sacred weapons. One of them being Wilhelm I, who was the founder of the Adrestian Empire and the creator of House Hresvelg, all to fight Nemesis back. Seiros arrived in the Fodlan we know now 41 years before Wilhelm established the Empire in Enbar. Wilhelm marked this establishment as year 1 of the Imperial calendar, and in Imperial year 32, Wilhelm instigated a war against Nemesis, the War of Heroes, and it was in the Imperial year 91 that Seiros finally killed Nemesis on the Tailtean Plains. Sedith and Yuri's sea support in Three Hopes corroborates the idea that Nemesis lived for several centuries. How many of them were spent ruling as the King of Liberation is a different question. In In any case, alongside him were the Agarthans operating in the background. Nemesis's defeat and the eventual confiscation of the hero's relics leads to Seiros rewriting history completely in a way that makes Nemesis and the 10 elites champions of the goddess. They were the ones given the crests and hero's relics, now simply being weapons from the goddess and not the remains of her family, to save Fodlan from the evil gods from the north. The evil gods, of course, being her siblings that were slaughtered. Eventually, these champions became founders of Fodlan's elite bloodlines. The church's narrative continues with Nemesis as the last living hero of the original group, with the corrosive nature of power overcoming him, and the descendants of the elites with arrogance and greed, turning on each other and spiraling Fodlan into constant war, ultimately forcing the Empire's hand to declare war to free humanity from their cursed fate.
Nemesis, the King of Liberation. He is an ancient king of mankind who was defeated by Seiros over 1,000 years ago. When Fodlan was attacked by wicked gods, it is said that the goddess gifted Nemesis with the sword of the Creator. Nemesis used that sword to defeat the wicked gods, saving all of Fodlan. Henceforth, he was dubbed the King of Liberation. However, his power began to corrupt him until he himself turned to the darkness. Saint Seiros was forced to destroy him.
The history rewrite brought Fodlan together under the narrative that Nemesis was the King of Liberation, but in the sense that he served the goddess to save humanity from other evil gods. The church couldn't remove Nemesis's King of Liberation narrative completely, as it was so firmly established for centuries. So his downfall was added in, meant to be tragic so as to retain his reputation and make the church look like they were ending his reign for the greater good. This is Fodlan's history according to Three Houses, and is further substantiated by Three Hopes as we know it. With all of this established, we can finally explore the numerous possibilities of where and when Fortune's Weave takes place. Warning: the rest of this video dives into fan theory and opinion. We have to interpret events in a certain way based on the trailer's information and misinformation. This video is meant to be for fun, so expect conjecture of course, but I will do my best to justify it with evidence. Before we dive into any theory, we have to talk about the Sothis moment in the trailer. Sothis is an adult and is probably alive due to not being asleep, which points to this moment occurring before the Agarthan attack, leading to her hibernation. This moment in the trailer is meant to be very confusing. We don't know when this moment occurs. It could be taking place in the present day, or can be a flashback, or is some old incarnation of Sothis alluded to by the Shadow Library entry at a different point in time. And also, always bear in mind that Sothis has the ability to travel through fucking time. So genuinely, we have no idea when this is happening. This is deliberate trailer bait. The accompanying Nintendo article actually teases this as a familiar face, quote unquote. So they know what they're doing. We can't even definitively say that this is actually Sothis and not some other dragon who looks like her entirely. Who knows? Now with the whole historic preamble done, let's talk about Fortune's Weave being a prequel to Three Houses. This rings the alarm bells for most Three Houses players for two main reasons. The trailer takes place where a Nabatean rules a city as the Divine Sovereign. This matches up with the distant past of Fodlan, where Nabateans served as governors before the Agarthans attacked. However, the presence of multiple crests belonging to the 10 elites makes things complicated. Not only does Dietrich have a crest of Lamine, but there is also a statue of a bearded man holding two severed heads with the crest of Fraldarius engraved at its base. The statue is of particular interest, and Twitter and Reddit users speculated as to whether this could be Nemesis holding the head of Sothis and someone else. But Nemesis has no association with Fraldarius. There doesn't look to be any pointy ears on either head, suggesting these heads are from a Nabatean body. The man is wielding a spear, and contextually this battle is happening during the heroic games, as you can see the fight happening in the arena. So this might be a statue of a champion or some other hero. Bear in mind that a ton of characters in this game have beards as well. Just because it has a beard doesn't mean it's Nemesis. I should note that the body tattoo of the axe fighter Lita is fighting looks very close to the crest of Gautier, but is still noticeably different in the midsection, because I think someone would bring that up and I just want to clarify. This city looks massive, historic, and unlike anything seen in Fodlan. For it to take place shortly during Nemesis's rule seems impossible. In the Japanese trailer, the Divine Sovereign calls this the Dagsion Gladiatorial Games or something. The closest name that sounds like it is Dagda, but in Japanese, it's pronounced Daguza. Theodora is the ruler of Salamis, localization on this is pending as well, which also has no association with anywhere in the Fodlan we know. Assuming Sothis is dead and the Crests have been passed down for decades or even centuries, I think it's possible that this game takes place in the same timeline, but in a different continent entirely. Whether it happens between Imperial Year 1 and 1180, the start of Three Houses, is anyone's guess. However, Intelligent Systems has connected continents before, first with Fire Emblem Guidance Valentia. Valentia is a neighboring continent to Arcanea, and despite its rather close proximity, enough for Pala, Catria, and S to travel there, and for Camus to wander adrift to become Zeke, it's a world filled with its own centuries of long history. It has its own gods, who are also children of Naga in Mila and Duma, with magic and culture surrounding them far different than that of Arcanea. Valentia even has its own falchion that looks entirely different from Arcanea's, but is functionally the same. What's more, genealogy of the Holy War in Thracia 776's continent of Yggdrasil has an even deeper connection to Arcanea than Valentia does. Yggdrasil is geographically much further away, and its story occurs long before the events of FE1. In fact, according to Shozo Kaga, the series' original developer, Yggdrasil was far more advanced than Arcanea, who at the time barely held any level of civilization. The story goes that Loptis was among many earth and divine dragons living in Arcanea at the time. As the dragons were facing extinction, Naga proposed they siphon their power into dragon stones and allow the human race to progress via passing the torch. Loptis hated humans and this idea, so he took it upon himself to eradicate them. Naga declared war against him to protect humanity. Eventually, a bishop from Yggdrasil, named Geir, sailed to Arcanea, wanting to live out the legend of drinking holy dragon blood to acquire tremendous power and eternal life. He eventually met Loptis, where they formed a blood pact. The bishop drank his blood, and they returned to Yggdrasil. Geir would then create the Loptis Empire and brutally rule over humanity under Loptis' control up until the First Holy War, where Naga and the 11 other dragons came to Yggdrasil's rescue. If any of that lore sounds familiar to Three Houses, it's because it is. This is all to say that whether this game takes place before or during the events of Three Houses, it's entirely possible that this continent is not geographically close to Fodlan. The Divine Sovereign rules a port city, and so how would warriors who want to fight in the heroic games arrive there? By boat, kinda like what Dietrich is doing. Dietrich's origins. Notice the distinct coat of arms here. It follows Fodlan's heraldic practices, realistic designs of a creature/thing, in his case a horse, alongside a crest, as opposed to the more stylized banner of Elmira and the other banners we see in the trailer. Additionally, we have a decent idea of where Mercedes and Yuritsa, and thus Dietrich by extension, come from. In Three Hopes, we learn that there is a small cluster of imperial baronies packed together: Gillinger, Barnabas, and the newly established Martine. Mercedes' father was an imperial baron, Baron Martritz, and thus the head of House Martritz. He was married to a commoner who bore a crest of Lamine, and would have Mercedes with her. However, before Mercedes was born, Baron Martritz died in 1157. As he had no other living relatives of his house, House Martritz was dissolved. So when Mercedes was born, she both inherited her mother's status as a commoner and her crest. Mercedes' mother's social status was never explicitly stated whether or not she was considered a noble or commoner, and while one may assume she was a noble due to her crest, Mercedes never inherited any title from either her father or her mother, and the house dissolves since Mercedes wasn't born yet. This would mean someone got their family's land, and the fact that House Martine and its status as barons is the only house described as newly established, it is theorized that they most likely got Baron Martritz's land, aka Mercedes' home. And thanks to Three Hopes' war map, we know where the barony of Martine is. From here, Mercedes' mother would remarry, this time to Baron Bartels, another imperial baron, so as to give financial security and nobility status for her daughter. Though we don't know exactly where House Bartels' lands are, we do know that Baron Bartels was trying to acquire as many crests for his house as possible. One of these crests was the crest of Mercedes' mother, the crest of Lamine. Baron Bartels and Mercedes' mother would have a child of their own, Emil, who would be born with that crest. But eventually, Mercedes' mother would get too old to have more kids, so Mercedes and her mother would eventually flee House Bartels and the mistreatment they endured there. But Baron Bartels would hunt them down. Eventually, Emil would learn about Baron Bartels' plan to forcefully marry Mercedes and have crest children with her. In a fit of murderous rage, Emil would kill the vast majority of House Bartels and run off into the night, with most assuming he was behind the massacre. Emil would eventually be found by Edelgard and the Agarthans, who forged him a new identity as Yuritsa von Hrim, a supposed distant relative of the extinct House Hrim, alongside his own split personality, the Death Knight, becoming a scythe-wielding knight dressed as if he were death itself. The Death Knight's Scythe of Sariel has the Agarthan symbol engraved on it. Meanwhile, a cousin of House Bartels would inherit their baronial title. With all of these details coming together to form a cohesive idea of Yuritsa's homeland, another document from Three Hopes gives us more information on the Crest of Lamine and Yuritsa's identity as the Death Knight, in the document called Fears and Frights of Fodlan, Death's Scythe. During the Red Wolf Moon, on nights when the moon is full, be sure your windows are shut tight when you sleep, for those are the nights when death will come with its giant scythe to harvest lives. And don't even think about going outside. In the morning, they'll find your corpse drained of blood. From an old Mach legend. The Mach in An Old Mach Legend geographically refers to Western Adrestia and Western Fargus. There is a historical archduchy of Mach, as well as the Mach Coast, which contains the Mach Way, said to link the empire east to west to Hevering's capital in the center. Last, Mach itself is the region of Fodlan that is connected to the Western Church, which is in the center of the region. This all but states that Martreats and or Bartels would be located around here. The contents of the legend would then indicate that this is not the first time death tore through the area, and that Mercedes' mother shared these old legends of her home with her children. These circumstances can then tell us firstly, Yuritsa took the form of the Death Knight from the legend as his alter ego, and I would argue that his Bernadetta B support confirms this.
Why do you wear that crazy looking armor when you're pretending to be the Death Knight? Are you just into the look of it? You like spooky stuff?
Well, I may have been drawn to that aspect. To look sinister, to embody death.
Secondly, men of the Lamine bloodline may genetically be predisposed to extreme violence. The Crest of Lamine has a healing effect in-game, however, Yuritsa is able to sense blood, being able to track the scent of it like a hound, and is generally just obsessed with blood.
So be it. We'll follow the blood scent.
Right, of course. We'll follow... Wait, what?
Even more akin to a bloodhound, the White Clouds chapter taking place during the Red Wolf Moon's preamble refers to hunts. It's likely that this healing trait of the crest in-game is linked to blood, with its bearers sometimes getting a more gruesome interest in it, unlike Mercedes, who focuses on healing those who are bleeding from injuries. The fact that we never see any mention of a House Lamine is also very suspicious, as the other 10 elites all have corresponding noble houses. Heck, even the nature of Maurice's descendants have more lore. It could be that the house was destroyed or never formed because of these violent tendencies that may have been caused by their crest. Perhaps Dietrich is of this forgotten House Lamine. After all, the lands around the barony of Martin are all little baronies. Perhaps they were all once a unified county of Lamine, or something, but I digress. Compare this to Dietrich's coat of arms, physical likeness to Yuritsa, both their personal abilities being called Murderous Intent, and the Answerer's combat art being called Bloodletting. You know, having a corpse drained of blood? I'm not trying to argue that Dietrich is death itself from the legend, but it certainly is thematic, no? In any case, the theory suggests that Dietrich travels from Fodlan by boat to this new land. None of this even considers how out of place Dietrich looks compared to everyone else. Wherever these fights are taking place, have you noticed how diverse these characters look? Fodlan, due to Rhea's watch, was far more restrictive with foreign interactions, which was a key motivation for Claude. I'm not exaggerating when I say that everyone from Fodlan's mainland is basically just a bunch of white Europeans. A lot of this having to do with Rhea's xenophobic tendencies in her efforts to stabilize Fodlan and the church. It's openly stated in various places in Three Houses that the player just gets to know a very small piece of the world. Dagda, for example, is alluded to as a continent-spanning nation, but it's never truly explored beyond what Shamir, who came from there, says about it. Heck, the pagan altar in the Abyss is a Dagdan god of fate. Linhart mentions in some routes in Three Houses that there were far more relics than the ones shown in Three Houses and later on Three Hopes, which ended up being lost to history. The best example of this in that game are the Fetters of Dromi, which barely escaped this fate. The dialogue between Byleth and Duke Gert in Yuri's Paralogue talks about the Fetters' origins in more detail.
These are the Fetters of Dromi. They draw on the power of the Crest of Obon. It's a priceless treasure that ended up in Dagda. After the truce, they sent it to us in friendship. One story holds that Saint Seros subjugated the 10 elites and the clans who followed them. There may have been a few clan elders who fled across the sea to escape suppression.
This explanation proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Heroes' relics and Crest lineage continue far from Fodlan's mainland. This would explain Dietrich's ties to the Lamine clan and his relic. It is deliberately written to be among the Heroes' relics, and could very well fit into the same category of Three Hopes' Heroes' relics, which were never present in Three Houses. Let's turn our attention to crests in the trailer. While some of these were also lost to history in Three Houses prior to Cindered Shadows, these are explicitly featured in this trailer. When I brought up the 4 saints, and then the 11 dragons killed at the Red Canyon, I left out the other 5 kinds. The Bloom Dragon, associated with the crest of Noah, the Ice Dragon, associated with the crest of Oban, the Snow Dragon, associated with the crest of Chevalier, and the Dark Dragon, associated with the crest of Timotheus, and the Thorn Dragon, associated with the crest of Ernest. These 5 crests are the rarest of all. In fact, Ernest is so rare of a crest that it's all but completely lost, with Anna somehow being the only bearer of the crest in both Three Houses and Hopes. Ironically, a major bearer at that. Ernest, low-key, might be more rare than the Crest of Flames. These 5 crests weren't associated with Sothis, Seiros, or the 4 saints during the War of Heroes, nor do they have any ties to the 10 elites, and therefore no house for the nobility to easily produce these crests as a commodity. Barring Ernest, these 4 make up the crests of the 4 apostles, a group of 4 specialists in magic and blood rituals tasked with reviving Sothis. When they failed to do so, it is stated that they simply left the church. Whether they were first-generation human crest bearers or the oldest children of Sothis is unknown, and more on this later. But during their time in Fodlan, they passed their crest lineage down to their descendants or by other means. But the circumstances of these crests not falling in line with either the church nor the elites fated them into something completely different. Let's refer to Yuri and Balthus's B support in Three Houses, where the latter is digging into Yuri's past.
There's a story they tell where my mom grew up. Long ago, the village got in a squabble with some folks looking to conquer the place. A village elder gave some holy red stuff to their wounded soldiers. Some kind of liquid, who knows? After she did that, some of them made a complete recovery, against all odds. The rest of them were changed, but not for the better. They up and vanished before long.
And then?
Crests suddenly manifested for the ones who survived. They weren't inherited or gifted by the goddess. It's a real thinker, yeah? A real thinker.
Yuri Leclerc belongs to no house, and is only associated with Count Rowe of the Kingdom as his adopted son and quote-unquote alleged distant biological relative. In fact, Oban is just an old man in the same village who gave him a blood transfusion to save him from an illness, giving him his crest, and the full story of Yuri's survival is fleshed out in Yuri's A support with Sedith in Three Houses.
He could barely even walk on his own. So we took him in, and made sure he was cared for. And I caught the plague. And of course, there was nothing my mother could do about that. That's when the old man saved me. I have no idea what kind of treatment or medicine he used to do it.
Is that so? And where is this elderly gentleman now?
Oh, he passed away a long time ago. I told you. This was back when I was a kid. Are you saying that old man saved my life by giving me the power of a crest?
I am simply saying the possibility exists. Alas, I cannot know for certain. You always cursed the blood that flowed through you. But in the end, it saved that child's life. It brings me great relief to know that you found salvation in your last moments. Oban, my friend. Be at peace.
What's kind of crazy about this is that Oban resented his crest but was close friends with Sedith. Given that he dies of old age and the Kupala village elder is also, well, older, this suggests that the apostles were either first-generation crest bearers who lived for a very, very long time, or were Nabatean but were among the first and therefore oldest of Sothis' children due to their age, but neither is confirmed. The Noah crest belongs to Nouvelle's sole survivor, Constance. House Nouvelle did not arrange marriages with other houses to pass down their crests for more power so as not to let their powers fall into the wrong hands.
Close to 1,000 years ago, Saint Noah parted ways with Saint Seiros. She lived out her days in seclusion on what would become Nouvelle territory. Her children obscured their origins before serving the Empire. It wasn't long before they were ennobled. I suspect St. Noah feared that revealing her crest would only lead to tragedy.
So she passed it off as the crest of Midquel, which already existed within the Empire.
Yes, much like St. Midquel, St. Noah was known to be a masterful mage. Her magic ensured that any test would not reveal the true nature of her crest. Otherwise, someone may have exploited our bloodline long ago.
House Nouvelle was known for producing as few heirs as possible. It was also known for keeping its offspring pure, mostly by disallowing marriage with other houses. All of that effort was in order to conceal Noah's bloodline, wasn't it?
And for all their efforts to remain low-key, there is a Noah crest bearer in the trailer. Last of the Apostles is the Dark Dragon associated with Timotheus. The trailer did not explicitly show the crest in the trailer, but Lita's powers line up with Happy's. Happy hails from a forest village founded by Timotheus within the Adrestian Empire. This village was especially secluded, so much so that a 9-year-old Happy ran away to explore the world. Tragically, she was kidnapped by the Agarthan Cleobulus, aka Cornelia, and was experimented on for the next 8 years. With the crest of Timotheus being able to attract animals, the resulting experimentation eventually resulted in demonic beasts being immediately lured to Happy's location wherever she sighed. This now brings us back to the Fortune's Weave trailer, the presence of Oban's crest in Kai. Noah's crest on the masked woman, and Lita's ability to summon demonic beasts proves that not only Crest of the Elites have traveled far beyond Fodlan, but so has the even less common crests of the Apostles. The conglomeration of all these warriors in Dagsion, led by a Nabatean celebrating crest bearers, could mean that the Divine Sovereign was originally from Fodlan, but left to found his own land. Indeed, the title of Divine Sovereign is much like the epithets used by other Nabateans. And if this is possible, who's to say that other Shield and Aegis dragons came with him? Who's to say that other Thorn, Ice, and Dark dragons came with him? If the Holy Tomb was any indication, there were multiple dragons of any given kind out there besides Sothis. Lamine has 3 separate heroes relics, each requiring a crest stone to activate. There is one thing that I find very interesting about the Divine Sovereign that I wanted to share. Now, this is very vibes-based, so take this conjecture for what it is, but I find him to be a albeit superficial parallel to Dmitri. It's no surprise that there are similarities between these major characters and the house leaders of 3 houses, but that leaves Dmitri with nothing at first glance. The Grim Dragon was otherwise known as the Vigorous, a title fitting for a ruler who champions strength, vigor, and other heroic qualities, so what the Divine Sovereign is demonstrating with the heroic games. He is treated like a king, Dmitri becomes a king. There is a statue of him wielding a lance. Dmitri's signature weapon is a lance. A Nabatean with blue eyes is relatively abnormal. Dmitri has blue eyes though. If this screenshot is a confrontation between him and Theodora, they might have a history, like Dmitri and Edelgard. Last, the big emblem thing on his chest and robes looks, albeit loosely, like the Blathid crest. Now, I'm not saying he is literally actually just Blathid, but gun to my head, if you asked me what kind of dragon this guy is, I'm picking either a Grim Dragon, or he's a pre-incarnation of Sothis alluded to by the Agarthans in a previous cycle of the world, which is another theory that I have, but I cannot keep doing this to myself for this video, so maybe that will be in yet another script. Again, these are superficial comparisons, but I thought it was cool to bring up. Anyways, the possibilities are pretty vast at this point as far as a timeline goes. At literally any point after Sothis went to sleep, Nabateans who didn't stay behind at the Red Canyon could have chosen to leave on their own terms and become gods themselves, passing on their blood for humans to consume. If this new continent has its own origins of crests, then it technically doesn't even require Sothis to have been killed yet. And at any point after the massacre, or during Nemesis' rule, or between Imperial Year 1 and 1180 and beyond, children of the Elites and the Apostles could have fled or simply left Fodlan to travel to other lands to settle elsewhere. Or they could have been part of the clans of the 10 Elites and escaped persecution, spreading their crest lineage far beyond Fodlan and displacing their heroes' relics from their point of origin. By itself, humans having crests should indicate that the War of Heroes already happened or is just taking place, given that the actions Nemesis took are how humanity in Fodlan first gained them and why the 4 Saints shared their blood to the Adrestian Empire to empower their forces against them. However, the Apostles did this too, and so the 11 other dragons would be able to do this also. This, of course, doesn't explain the heroes' relics being called as such by the game though, due to their context being tied to the War of Heroes and by proxy Sothis' death. There is a potential explanation explanation for this though. Three Houses was never specific with what was already common knowledge at the time Rhea rewrote history after defeating Nemesis. This includes the title Heroes' Relics, as even before the War of Heroes, humans thought of Nemesis and his crew as actual heroes, meaning it's possible the term hero originated in Fodlan as just people that were able to slay dragons, with the weapons they made from them being given the title of heroic by association. After Rhea won, the name stuck, but their origins were scrubbed. After all of the important confirmed changes in Fodlan's history was all to make Nemesis out to be a fallen hero slaying gods from the north who were actually just her siblings, and the other elites being long dead heroes whose descendants turned evil for a time. Also, humanity could have a reason to defect and join her side of the war. It's possible that this new continent has a much less informed idea of what Heroes' Relics even are if they ever came across one, because we only know of one Heroes' Relic so far, which is possessed by Dietrich, who is incredibly Euritza-coded, seen sailing on a boat with zero indication that he's royalty in this new continent and is instead just a wandering Myrmidon. Theodora has a crown of dragonbone, but her weapon is normal, so she may have a crest and doesn't possess a Hero's Relic, or she doesn't have a crest at all. Looking at everything all laid out, I believe Fortune's Weave will take place sometime after the Red Canyon Massacre. The inclusion of crests like Kai having Oban and the inclusion of heroes' relics like Dietrich makes this difficult to argue a pre-Nemesis setting, but that leads to the possibility that crests and relics had already spread further than we thought. Dietrich is a critical piece to this theory. His design and personality, even down to his personal skill, lining up with Euritza, suggests ties to the violent Lamine lineage. Next, the sheer diversity of this new setting is unlike anything seen in Fodlan. Rhea's isolationist and xenophobic policies kept her people insular, but Fortune's Weave shows a land where crests and cultures come together. A place like this makes sense for an earlier era of the world, or one geologically distant from Fodlan entirely. Brand new continents, same timeline or no, are ideas Intelligent Systems has done before. For it to happen here is not beyond the realm of possibility. Taken together, these details make a prequel or distant midquel theory justifiable. The crazy thing is that Three Houses' world building and lore is so ridiculously vast that even far out ideas like Fortune's Weave being a sequel or a pre-cycle prequel can be meaningfully argued for. Hell, maybe I'll do those ideas next. This video was a really fun experience to even just go back and learn even more Fodlan lore for myself. Even if the prequel theory ends up being completely false and I missed the mark entirely, I can safely say that I learned a ton about Three Houses' world, and hopefully you did too. Thanks for watching. Deuces.